Hello, Judge Bailey. Welcome to our program.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Could you share about a little bit yourself?
Yeah, be happy to. I just retired after 8.5 years as a Superior Court judge in El Dorado County. In that capacity, I handled every type of case type that there was, including criminal, complex to the simplest matters. I did civil, probate, and for 4 years, I was the presiding juvenile judge for El Dorado County.
So where is the El Dorado County? So maybe some audience still curious.
Yeah, it's outside of Sacramento all the way up to South Lake Tahoe.
Oh, in the Lake Tahoe area.
I was on the bench in South Lake Tahoe.
Okay, so what's your background?
Well, in the 1980s, I was Deputy Director of the State Department of Social Services. In that capacity, I worked closely with the California legislature on many different issues, including welfare reform and much of the reform that we did in the 1980s on residential care, foster homes, foster parent reform. In the 1990s and 2000s, I was a practicing lawyer in California. I handled many different issues, including many trials, criminal trials. I was a criminal defense attorney during that period of time, and I did licensing work, defended people against the state of California.
Okay.
And since 2009, I've been a judge, till I retired in August of 2017 to run for Attorney General.
Okay. Can you tell me why you want to run this position?
Well, as a judge, I began to see the same people coming through my courtroom all the time. They were committing the same types of crimes, they had the same types of problems, and as a judge you handle one case at a time. And what I learned is to have a greater impact on public policy, you needed to have someone, and it's the proverbial someone, go out and be willing to engage in the discourse of a candidate running for another public office. Well, there wasn't any other someone who would be willing to go out and do this type of thing. And so I decided that I would run for California Attorney General. And to do that, it seemed to me that you can do one job well at one time. And so I retired as a judge. My term wasn't up until 2020, but to be able to devote full-time to running for California Attorney General, I retired, and I am now running full-time for California Attorney General.
Okay, so during the past, in your view, what's the achievement during your past work?
Well, I'm particularly proud of several things. I worked very closely with our other county partners to develop a dual status program for our youth that are in the delinquency and dependency court. And the reason for that was that many of the kids that were coming into the system either as delinquents or because they were abused and neglected as dependents had similar problems. And the whole issue that we needed to work out was how to bring their needs together and solve the problems, provide services to those kids. The other thing that I was particularly proud of is I was the judge who who led the effort to develop a veterans court for El Dorado County. I didn't go out and reinvent the wheel on providing services to veterans, but what I did do is I took the lead and made sure that our county had a veterans court program both on what we call the western slope, which is the side closest to Sacramento, and I also developed one in South Lake Tahoe, which had to deal on a bi-state basis between services coming out of Nevada and people who were residents of California. So those two instances I'm particularly proud of as a judge.
Okay. So what's your agenda in this campaign? What kind of thing you want to promote, or what kind of thing you really reject?
Well, I'm particularly concerned that the Attorney General's office has become more like a public interest law firm, less concerned about your problems and mine, not concerned about our neighborhoods, and they've lost touch with California. The political leaders that have been in the office of Attorney General have been more concerned with running for other offices on a state and national basis, and have lost focus on California's needs. When you ask me what do I reject focusing 100% of my attention on what's going on in Washington. I want to be able to focus on the rule of law here in California, protecting California interests, and doing that alone and not worrying about what's going on in other places of the nation or the world.
Okay. In this section, we will talk about the following different issue. What's your opinion? So the first one I want to ask you is about the SB 47. Is Governor Jerry Brown just signed a bill, Century City. So what's your opinion for the Century City?
Thank you. I think the statute itself is misguided policy. It protects only the criminals, tries to inhibit and prevent our local first responders from dealing with the federal government and federal immigration authorities. Quite frankly, the Constitution of the United States provides exclusive authority over immigration law to the federal government. And what we've done here in California is we've attempted and are attempting to obstruct that law. And I think fundamentally that's the wrong way to go, and it's public policy that we need to change. Quite frankly, that law should be repealed, and repealed immediately as opposed to letting it go forward. The problem with sanctuary state, as it's been written by the California legislature, is that essentially the only people that are impacted in that legislation are those that are criminals, have violated our laws here in California. Those are the very people we wouldn't want to keep in this state. If they can't comply with California law, you would think that we would want to make sure that they are in fact removed from the United States if they've committed the appropriate aggravated felony on the federal level. Unfortunately, the way the law was constructed, it takes a heightened violation, and then only the only violations are those that we've deemed to be serious or violent felonies. What isn't covered, for example, are, domestic violence. That sounds pretty violent to me if somebody beats up his wife, girlfriend, or significant other. Those people, law enforcement is not able to notify the federal government. Secondly, a person that would rape an unconscious person, they're not automatically subject to removal. It makes no sense to me that there are certain crimes that are by nature violent that we would now say we're not going to cooperate with the federal government on to remove an illegal undocumented alien. You would think that it would be a no-brainer, but apparently it is not.
So why do you think that California right now in this position? What's the reason?
Well, it appears that it's become overly political, having to do with the current administration's desire to continue to fight with Washington. And you can disagree with what's happening in Washington. You can agree with it. But the bottom line is we have a responsibility as our chief law enforcement and law officer in California to cooperate and be prepared to work together with the federal government to ensure public safety. And frankly, I think Sacramento has gotten into, being politics 24/7 instead of protecting, our neighbors and our neighborhoods from lawbreakers.
Yeah. So recently, Kate Stanley's case on trial. So, what's your opinion? The female victim. So why this thing happened? You think it's because the illegal immigrant, or because the someone didn't keep their gun safely?
Well, really the issue with Kate. It's a horrible situation. I feel for the family. We need to have law enforcement officers, our chief law officer and law enforcement officer for the state, being the Attorney General, whose primary focus is on the victims as opposed to the lawbreakers. I stand with Kate Steinle's family. I want to stand up for them as victims of a violent crime. I don't know why the illegal immigrant ended up with a firearm. We know where it came from. The fact of the matter is he shouldn't have had a firearm. The law says and prescribes that he not have a firearm. But more importantly, he was well known to the political leadership. They had arrested this gentleman on numerous occasions, exactly. Yeah. And they refused to honor the detainers issued by ICE, to the detriment of public safety and the safety of a innocent young woman who ended up being killed by this guy. That's absolutely inexcusable, should never have happened. And quite frankly, we as citizens of California should be embarrassed that we allowed it to happen. That's one of the primary reasons we need to change the people who are in charge in Sacramento, electing somebody who's such as me, who's concerned about the safety of the public and wants to run the office in a way that is going to protect all our citizens.
Okay, so we talked about the gun just now. So let's talk about the Las Vegas shooting in October. So you think that's the individual case or the individual person with a crazy idea, or the law has to change? You have to get more regulation about the gun. What's your opinion?
Well, I think we need to protect the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. And that gives, based on the Supreme Court's opinion, a right to all our citizens who are lawful, law-abiding, to possess firearms. What we've gotten into here in California is an ever-increasing desire to regulate every piece of a firearm. That, to me, is ridiculous. Now, having said that, we need to go back and change the law. It isn't up to me as Attorney General to suddenly tell you that I'm not going to enforce the law. But the bottom line is, I think we have gone too far. Some of the laws passed by the legislature I believe to be unconstitutional. If they're unconstitutional, I intend to tell the court. I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, an unabashed supporter of the Second Amendment, and I'm supported by gun owners here in California. The California Gun Owners Association, I'm proud to say, supports me.
Okay. So what is your opinion? So how can we prevent this thing happening in the future?
Well, the Las Vegas shooting, it was the shooter that's responsible for that shooting. He could have had a car and run people over. He could have had a knife and stab people. It's not the firearm in and of itself. What we need to do is to keep firearms out of the hands of felons. You know, it's currently not legal for a felon to possess a firearm. That's the Kate Steinle case. We need to keep firearms out of the hands of the mentally ill. You know, and we've got law in California that's designed to do that. But to regulate every last piece of a firearm is a waste of public money and a waste of time.
Okay, thank you. So let's talk about the drug and the property crime. I heard a very interesting story last night. They say that San Francisco is very crazy about break the window and stolen the property inside a car. And some car owner have the solution that put a sticker on the window, say that no valuable thing in the car, so don't break the window. So how is your opinion?
Well, you know, obviously, when we passed Prop 47 several years ago, the Safe Streets and Schools Act, and we decriminalized property crimes. It doesn't take a rocket scientist and it doesn't take an expert to know that the criminals who are committing these types of property crimes also realize that the penalties for property crimes dropped. It is, you know, you've got people out there that are in the business of stealing. They're in the business of supporting their drug habits. They're in the business of selling property for money. The bottom line is that policy that we implemented to decriminalize property crimes is just a failed policy. We've had enough time to realize that the crime rate is spiking. Property crime rates around the state are spiking, and what we need to do is to change that law. If you don't have a consequence for committing a crime, there's no incentive for a person not to commit that crime. Let me give you an example of an arraignment that I did several years ago after the proposition passed. And while it wasn't a burglary of a vehicle, it happened to be a burglary and theft from several businesses. And this particular individual went into the Big Five sporting goods, and he knew how much the trigger was, $950. He stole about $850 worth of goods from Big Five. And that's bad enough. I mean, frankly, I was trying to figure out what you could carry out of that store, you know, sports equipment and the like, you know, worth, you know, $850. But nevertheless, he wasn't finished there. He goes over to Kmart and steals another $700 in property from Kmart. Well, apparently the Kmart property wasn't good enough for him, because he did go back to Big Five and he stole another $600 worth of goods from Big Five before he was apprehended and came before me. And his response was, "Judge, let me out. I want to out on my own recognizance. That is, Judge, just let me out of jail so I can go back onto the street." And I said, "Well, why would I do that? You're a serial thief." And he says, "Well, why are you upset about it? Nobody else is." And I think that really sends the message. The people that engage in this conduct, that go into stores and steal, go into your garage and steal your lawnmower, burglarize your home, because if you're not present in the home at the time, it's, you know, it's simply a misdemeanor offense as long as they keep it below $950. And what we've got is a class of people who understand. I mean, they're as sophisticated in breaking the law as we are in trying to be responsible for the law. And, you know, what we've done is send this message by Prop 47 that it's okay to steal. No wonder San Francisco has the spike in car burglaries. these people understand that it's, you know, that society has now said it's pretty much okay to steal from people.
Okay. So I heard about you very support the three-strike principle. So what's the reason?
Well, because, you know, it's those people that were committing the third strike who are committing maybe the most violent and serious crimes around. And I have always been a firm supporter of three strikes, because ultimately we in society need to come to the conclusion that after we've given you several chances, and believe me, it's much more than two strikes. It's usually they have long rap sheets. They've committed many crimes previously, but at the third crime, the third strike, not the third crime, but the third strike, you know, at that point, we as a society need to say, we can't trust you to be out on the street. We need to house you in a state prison. You know, it's not too harsh to have our neighborhoods, our kids and grandkids protected. And you know, three strikes does that. We know it does that because once it was implemented in the 1990s, the crime rate fell drastically. And since Governor Brown and the administration in Sacramento has been changing the law, the crime rate has been going up, and it's been going up annually at double digits around the state. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that, you know, some of these policies that have been changed, many of these policies, is helping increase the crime rate. And, you know, it's nice to talk about crime going up at double digits and all that, but it's, you know, in a real sense, it's happening on your street, and it's happening to your neighbor, and sometimes it's happening to you. Yes. And we have an obligation in government. The Attorney General has an absolute obligation as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer to promote and implement policies that are going to protect us. And as Attorney General, that's exactly what I intend to do. I'm going to roll back some of these changes that have been made.
Okay. So the last question, what's the message you want to share with our Chinese audience?
Well, I want to share a message that the law needs to be applied uniformly and fairly. As a judge for 8.5 years, that's what I attempt to do every single day, is apply the law, promote justice. And you can't promote justice when you're picking and choosing the law. You need to fight to protect our neighbors, to protect our kids and our grandkids. And as Attorney General, that's exactly what I intend to do.
Okay. Thank you for sharing the important message with us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you, Judge.